I'll never forget the night my little brother asked me the question that changed everything. We were sitting on his bed, the way we always did before he went to sleep, and out of nowhere he looked at me with those big, serious eyes and said, "Hannah, who's the man that comes to your window at night?" At first I laughed. It wasn't even a nervous laugh, just the natural, older sister laugh that spills out when your little brother says something silly. I thought he was joking, or maybe just trying to scare me the way kids do when they hear stories at school. But then Eli tilted his head, dead serious, and whispered, "He smiles, but he doesn't blink." That's when something inside me shifted. My laugh died in my throat. The air in his room suddenly felt heavier, like the silence between us was pressing down. My skin prickled, and for the first time in years, I felt that sharp, crawling fear I thought only existed in childhood. You see, Eli isn't the kind of kid who makes up stories. He's only 7, but he's sensitive, observant in ways that sometimes make you uncomfortable. He notices things most people ignore: the sound of footsteps on the porch, the flicker of a streetlight outside, the way someone's voice changes when they're lying. So when he said it, I couldn't just brush it off. I tried to play it cool. I ruffled his hair and said, "That's funny, Eli. You're dreaming again. There's no man at my window." But he didn't smile. He didn't even argue. He just stared at me like I was the one who didn't understand. And something about that silence, his refusal to keep playing along, made my stomach knot. That night, after I tucked him in and went back to my room, I couldn't stop replaying his words. He smiles, but he doesn't blink. I wanted so badly to believe it was just a child's imagination, the result of too many scary cartoons, or maybe a nightmare he couldn't shake. But Eli hadn't been scared when he said it. He'd been matter of fact, certain, and that certainty ate at me. Let me give you some context so you understand why his words hit me the way they did. My name is Hannah Monroe, and I had just turned 24 when all this happened. I'd been living on my own for a while, but after a breakup with my boyfriend, I moved back into my mom's house to get my life together. The plan was temporary: save some money, help Mom out with Eli, and figure out what came next. Our mom, Karen, works night shifts as a nurse, which means I was often the one keeping Eli company in the evenings. He'd gotten used to creeping into my room when he couldn't sleep, curling up beside me while I read or scrolled through my phone. It became our little routine, and honestly, I didn't mind. That's why when he asked that question, it rattled me more than I want to admit, because he wasn't a kid who wanted to scare me. He was a kid who wanted to be close to me, who trusted me to protect him when Mom was gone. And if he was seeing something or someone outside my window, what did that mean for both of us? I remember lying in bed that night staring at my curtains. They fluttered a little with the hum of the ceiling fan, casting shifting shadows across the wall. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but after Eli's words, every little shadow looked suspicious. Every creak in the house made me sit up straighter. I even got out of bed once to check the window, pulling back the curtain slowly like I was afraid of what I'd see. Nothing. Just the backyard, the old oak tree, and the neighbor's porch light flickering in the distance. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting a 7-year-old's imagination get under my skin. I even laughed at myself when I climbed back into bed. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And that's where this story begins. Not with me seeing something, not with proof, but with a question. A simple, haunting question from my little brother that made me doubt everything I thought I knew about our safe little neighborhood, about our quiet house, about the dark outside my window. Because once you've heard a child you love say something like that, so calm, so certain, you can't just unhear it. You can't go back to believing everything is fine. You start to wonder what you're missing. You start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they're seeing the truth that you've been too blind or too afraid to see. When people hear this story, they always assume the fear began with Eli's question. But the truth is, that moment only hit me so hard because of the place I was in at the time, both in my life and inside my own head. I had just moved back home. After 2 years of living with my boyfriend, we split up, and the breakup left me bruised in ways I didn't expect. It wasn't just losing him, it was losing the apartment, the independence, the sense that I was building a future. At 24, packing my clothes back into boxes and moving into my childhood bedroom felt like a step backward I didn't want to take, but Mom welcomed me home without hesitation. Karen Monroe, my mom, is one of the strongest women I know. She works long shifts as a nurse at the county hospital, often overnight because those hours pay more. Her life hasn't been easy, raising Eli on her own after Dad left when I was in high school. But she doesn't complain. She keeps everything afloat with grit and stubborn love. Being back in her house was humbling. It was the same beige siding, the same squeaky porch step, the same faint smell of laundry detergent that clung to every room. Only this time, I wasn't the teenager sneaking out or slamming doors. I was the adult daughter trying not to feel like a failure while figuring out what came next. And then there was Eli. He's 7 years old, all skinny arms, and messy brown hair with a smile that makes you forget how cruel the world can be. But he's also different, sensitive, in a way that's hard to describe. While other kids are glued to video games, Eli notices things. He asks questions about the way the wind moves through the trees, or why the mailman always hums the same tune. He's curious and thoughtful, sometimes to the point where it unsettles you. When I came home, he was ecstatic. To him, I wasn't just his sister. I was his protector, his favorite person. He'd crawl into my bed on the nights Mom was gone, whispering stories until he fell asleep with his head on my arm. I didn't mind. In fact, in those early weeks, those nights kept me from spiraling into loneliness. But Eli also had this habit of saying things that stuck in your brain long after. Little observations, small truths, sometimes eerie questions. Like once when we were baking cookies, he looked up at me and said, "Do you ever feel like someone is watching us when the lights are on but the curtains are open?" He said it so casually, like he was asking me to pass the sugar. I laughed it off at the time, but later that night I found myself closing every curtain in the house. Our bond was strong, though. I helped him with homework, packed his lunch for school, and told him stories when he was scared of thunder. In some ways, I stepped into a second parent role without meaning to, especially with Mom gone so often at night. The house itself played into the atmosphere. My bedroom, the one I'd grown up in, had these wide windows that looked out into the backyard. During the day, they flooded the room with light, but at night, they felt different. The glass became black mirrors reflecting my own face back at me, while outside was just a shapeless void. Past the yard stood an old oak tree, its branches heavy and twisted, brushing against the siding when the wind picked up. I used to find the sound comforting when I was a teenager, but now, lying awake after Eli's words, it sounded less like nature and more like something or someone, testing the edges of the house. I tried to ground myself in routine. I picked up shifts at a local bookstore, helped Mom with groceries, drove Eli to soccer practice. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. On the surface, everything seemed normal. But beneath that normalcy was this constant hum of unease, not just because of the breakup or the uncertainty of being 24 with no clear direction. It was something about the house itself, about the nights when the walls seemed thinner, the air heavier. And with Mom gone for her 12-hour shifts, it was often just me and Eli inside, holding down the fort. That's why his words hit me the way they did, because in that house, at that time, I was already vulnerable, already searching for solid ground. So when Eli looked at me with those steady eyes and asked, "Who's the man at your window?" it wasn't just creepy. It was devastating. It cracked open the thin layer of safety I'd been clinging to since I came home. Before that night, I told myself my biggest problem was rebuilding my life. But after that question, everything shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't about heartbreak or money or pride. It was about something darker, something that felt like it had been waiting for me to come back home. The night Eli asked me about the man at my window, I told myself it was nothing, just a child's imagination. Maybe something he overheard at school or a dream he couldn't shake. Kids blur the lines between fantasy and reality all the time. That's what I repeated to myself as I lay in bed, staring at the dark outline of my curtains. But when a kid like Eli says something, you can't ignore it. He wasn't the type to tell ghost stories or invent things to get attention. If anything, he was quiet, thoughtful. He noticed patterns, like how our neighbor always left for work at exactly 6:15 a.m., or how Mom's shoes made a different sound on the kitchen floor depending on whether she was tired or not. When that kid tells you there's a man smiling at your window, you don't forget it. The next day, I tried to bring it up casually while I poured him cereal. "Hey, Eli," I said, sliding the bowl toward him, "about what you said last night, about the man at my window. What did you mean?" He looked up at me, spoon halfway to his mouth. His expression wasn't mischievous, it wasn't nervous, it was plain, like I'd asked him about the weather. "He comes sometimes," Eli said simply, "when you're asleep. I see him when I get up to use the bathroom." My stomach tightened. "And you've seen him more than once?" Eli nodded. "Yeah, he just stands there, looking in. He smiles, but he never blinks." I laughed again, but it sounded forced even to my own ears. "Eli, that's creepy. You're scaring yourself for no reason." He shrugged and went back to eating his cereal like the conversation was over. But for me, it wasn't. That evening, I noticed myself behaving differently. When I closed my blinds, I tugged them tighter than usual. When I checked the locks, I checked them twice. And when I heard the old oak branches scrape against the siding, I didn't brush it off the way I used to. Later that night, after Mom left for her shift, Eli padded into my room in his socks. He climbed onto my bed without asking and whispered, "Can I stay in here tonight?" I sighed, pulling the blanket over him. "You know Mom doesn't like when you sneak in here." "But he's out there again," Eli said quietly, "by your window." I froze. "Eli," I whispered back, "you can't just say things like that." His voice was so calm, so certain. "I'm not joking." I lay awake for hours, listening. At one point, I thought I heard a faint tapping sound, but I told myself it was a branch. It had to be a branch. I didn't have the courage to pull back the curtain and prove myself wrong. The days that followed only made it worse. One afternoon, Eli drew a picture at the kitchen table. He slid it over to me proudly, expecting me to look. It was a stick-figure drawing of our house, and in one of the windows, a tall, thin man with an exaggerated smile, standing outside in the dark. "Eli," I said carefully, "why did you draw this?" "Because that's what he looks like," Eli replied matter-of-factly. "See his eyes? They don't close." I wanted to crumple the paper and throw it away, but I didn't. Instead, I shoved it in a drawer, as if hiding it would make the idea less real. The third night, my nerves were shot. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow in the corner of my eye made me flinch. I started double-checking the backyard before I locked up for the night. Nothing. Always nothing. But Eli's behavior was changing too. He wouldn't sleep in his own bed anymore. He claimed the man was closer when he stayed alone. He'd wake me up at odd hours, shaking me and whispering, "Don't open your eyes. He's at the window." One night, I jolted awake to find Eli standing at the edge of my bed, staring at the curtains. His face was pale, his little hands clenched. "Eli," I whispered, "what are you doing?" "He's watching," Eli whispered back. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to yank the curtains open and scream at whatever or whoever was outside, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just lay there in the dark, holding my brother close, both of us straining to hear through the silence. That was the moment I realized this wasn't something I could laugh off anymore. Whatever Eli thought he saw, whether it was a man, a shadow, or just his imagination, it was consuming both of us. And the worst part? Deep down, I knew I didn't want to know if he was telling the truth. Because if he was, it meant something had been standing outside my window night after night, smiling at me while I slept. By the end of that week, I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. Eli's sleepless nights were wearing him down, and honestly, they were breaking me too. He wasn't just scared anymore. He was exhausted, hollow-eyed, and jumpy. And I wasn't far behind. It came to a head one night around 2 a.m. I woke up to the sound of something soft but deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. At first I told myself it was the tree again, those gnarled branches brushing against the siding like they always did. But then Eli's small hand shook my arm. "He's outside," he whispered. His voice was trembling, but his words were steady, like he'd been holding them in for too long. I sat up slowly, my heart hammering in my throat. The curtains were drawn, but even with them closed, I felt the weight of the window pressing against the room, like something was waiting on the other side of the glass. "Eli," I said firmly, trying to sound braver than I felt, "get back in bed. Stay under the blanket." He shook his head hard. "I don't want to close my eyes." Something inside me snapped then. I couldn't keep living in this half-denial, half-terror. I was the adult. I was the big sister. If something was outside, I needed to deal with it, if only to prove to both of us that it was nothing. I slid off the bed, walked to the window, and wrapped my fingers around the edge of the curtain. My chest felt like it might burst from the pressure of my own heartbeat. Eli whispered behind me, "Don't." But I yanked the curtain back anyway. Nothing. Just the dark stretch of the backyard, the oak tree swaying in the wind, the neighbor's light flickering faintly through the branches. I let out a shaky laugh, half relieved, half on the edge of tears. "See?" I whispered over my shoulder. "No one's there." But Eli wasn't looking at me. He was staring past me, eyes wide, lips trembling. His little voice cracked as he whispered, "Yes, he is." My blood ran cold. I slammed the curtain shut and pulled him into my arms. He was shaking so hard I could feel it through his pajamas. Dimyats. The next morning, I made a decision. Things had to change. I started with the practical steps. Every window and door in the house, I checked the locks, then checked them again. I pulled the blinds down tight. I even borrowed one of Mom's old lamps and kept it glowing in the corner of my room all night. When Mom came home from her shift, I tried to bring it up. "Hey," I said carefully, "have you ever noticed anyone hanging around the backyard? Like at night?" She gave me a tired smile as she poured coffee. "Hannah, this neighborhood's as safe as it gets. Probably just Eli's imagination. He's at that age, you know." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to lean into her calmness and let her dismiss it. But the way Eli clung to me every night told me this was more than a phase. The next turning point came 2 nights later. I woke up to find Eli not in my bed, but standing at the window. His small frame was silhouetted against the thin curtain, his hands pressed to the glass. My stomach lurched. "Eli!" I hissed, scrambling out of bed. "What are you doing?" He didn't turn around. His voice was a whisper, flat and terrified. "He's closer tonight." I grabbed him, pulling him back so fast he stumbled. "Don't ever stand at the window like that again. Do you hear me?" He nodded quickly, but his eyes darted toward the curtain, like he couldn't stop himself. That was the moment I knew this wasn't sustainable. Whatever Eli was seeing, or thought he was seeing, wasn't going away. And if it wasn't real, then it was something else just as dangerous, a fear that was consuming him, consuming both of us. So I made a decision. I told Eli he would sleep in my room from now on, no arguments. I moved his pillow and blanket onto my bed, set up the lamp, and stacked a chair against the door like some flimsy barrier against the unknown. It wasn't much, but it gave me the illusion of control. But deep down, I knew these small defenses weren't enough. If Eli was right, if someone really was us out there, we couldn't stay here. I wasn't going to let my little brother grow up thinking his world was a place where smiling strangers watched him through windows in the dead of night. That week, for the first time since moving back home, I began scrolling through apartment listings. Because whether or not I believed Eli completely, one thing was certain. This house no longer felt safe. And when your gut tells you to run, sometimes you have to listen. The night it happened, the air was unnaturally still. Even the oak tree outside seemed frozen, its heavy branches motionless against the sky. I remember lying in bed with Eli curled up beside me, his small hand clutching my wrist. The lamp in the corner cast a weak yellow glow, but it didn't make me feel safer. If anything, the light only deepened the shadows around the edges of the room. I had just started to drift off when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it wasn't faint. It was sharp, deliberate, and coming from my window. My entire body locked up. Eli's eyes snapped open like he had been waiting for it, his grip on my wrist tightening until it hurt. His voice was barely a whisper. "He's back." Every instinct in me screamed not to look, to pull the blanket over my head to pretend it wasn't real, but I couldn't keep living in that limbo anymore. I had to know. I had to see for myself. I slid out of bed, my legs trembling beneath me. The tapping stopped, but that almost made it worse. The silence felt heavy, loaded, like the air itself was holding its breath. I walked to the window. Each step felt like moving deeper into quicksand, my chest tightening with every inch. Eli whimpered behind me, "Don't, Hannah, please don't." But I couldn't stop. With a shaking hand, I grabbed the edge of the curtain and yanked it back. And there he was, a man. No, something shaped like a man, standing impossibly close to the glass. His face was pale, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, and his lips were curled into a grin, so wide it looked painful. His eyes were huge, unblinking, gleaming in the lamplight. He didn't move, not even when the curtain snapped open. He was just there, smiling, watching. For a split second, my brain refused to process it. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light, a reflection, anything but what it looked like. But then his head tilted just slightly, the grin never fading. That tiny movement shattered every fragile lie I had told myself. I screamed, a raw primal sound I didn't know I was capable of. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over Eli, who was already crying, his small arms reaching for me. "Mom!" I screamed, my voice breaking as I dragged Eli toward the door. "Mom!" She was home that night, thank God, and came running down the hall, her face pale and terrified. "What is it? What's wrong?" she shouted. I pointed at the window, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "There's someone. He's there, at the window." But when she rushed past me and yanked the curtain open, the space outside was empty. The yard lay silent, the oak tree swaying gently again as if it had never stopped. Nothing. Except for one thing. On the glass, right where the man's face had been, was a faint smudge, a handprint, large, pressed flat against the window, the streaks of condensation outlining each long finger. Mom's face went white. She locked the window, pulled the curtain closed, and turned to me with a firmness I had never heard in her voice. "Take Eli, go to your room, now." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, my body shaking. I scooped Eli up and carried him back to my bed, my mind racing. Through the thin walls, I heard Mom's footsteps as she checked the locks, the doors, every entry point in the house. She was trying to act calm, trying to make it seem like everything was under control. But I knew she had seen it too. The handprint was proof. Eli curled against me, his small body trembling. "I told you," he whispered. "I told you he was real." I held him tighter, my own tears spilling onto his hair, because he was right, and I had no idea what that meant for us. That was the night everything changed. Until then, I could convince myself it was just imagination, just shadows, just Eli's overactive mind. But once you see a face pressed to your window, once you see a smile that doesn't blink, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to feeling safe. After that night, I knew I couldn't stay. It wasn't a matter of courage or denial anymore. I had seen him. I had looked directly into his eyes through the glass, seen the sick, frozen grin stretched across his face, and felt his presence filling the room like a poison. You can't erase that kind of truth once it burns itself into you. The handprint on the window stayed there for days. No matter how much Windex I sprayed, no matter how many times I scrubbed, I could still see the faint outline. Maybe it was just in my head, but it felt like proof carved into the glass, a reminder. Eli refused to sleep in his own room after that. He clung to me constantly, his small body trembling every time the sun went down. He stopped drawing, stopped laughing the way he used to. At night, he whispered things I didn't want to hear. "He's waiting, Hannah. He doesn't want us to leave. He gets closer when you're asleep." Each word sank into me like ice water. I tried to comfort him, to tell him he was safe, but the truth was, I didn't believe it myself. I wasn't sleeping anymore. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing that face pressed against the glass. Mom did her best to stay calm, but I could tell the fear was seeping into her too. I caught her double locking the doors, leaving the porch light on all night, even pulling her car into the garage instead of the driveway. But she never talked about the handprint. She never admitted what she saw. Maybe she thought silence would protect us. Maybe she thought naming it would give it power. But I couldn't live like that. One morning, after another sleepless night with Eli curled against me, I woke up, opened my laptop, and signed the lease on a tiny one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't much, peeling paint, outdated appliances, but it had windows that faced a busy street instead of a backyard. More importantly, it had locks that I trusted. Within a week, I was gone. Mom hugged me tight when I left, her eyes wet but proud. She told me I was brave, that I was starting over. I didn't correct her. It wasn't bravery. It was survival. Eli stood on the porch as I loaded the last box into my car. He looked smaller than usual, his eyes wide and too serious for his age. When I knelt down to hug him, he whispered something in my ear that made my blood run cold. "What if he follows you?" I pulled back, searching his face, hoping for a hint of mischief or exaggeration, but there was nothing. Just the plain, unsettling certainty I had seen in his eyes the night he first asked me about the man at my window. Nellie in the apartment was different, quieter in some ways, louder in others. The sound of traffic replaced the creak of branches. The glow of streetlights spilled across my walls instead of the endless black void of the backyard. For a while, I slept with the lights on, my curtains taped shut. Slowly, I started to feel like I could breathe again. But safety isn't the same as peace. Even now, months later, I can't walk past a window without checking the glass. I can't hear a soft tapping sound without my chest tightening. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I swear I can feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. I don't know who or what he was. A man, a stalker, something worse. All I know is that he was real. Eli saw him long before I did, and I ignored it until it was too late. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not just the face, not just the handprint, but the fact that my little brother was the one who saw the truth first. He tried to warn me, and I laughed. I don't laugh anymore. There's anything I've learned from this, it's that children notice things adults don't. They see the cracks, the shadows, the patterns we're too busy or too stubborn to acknowledge. When a child tells you something that chills you to the bone, listen. Believe them. Because the night you dismiss their words might be the night something presses its face against your window, smiling, unblinking, waiting. That's the story of the man at my window. I don't know if he was human or something else. I don't know if he's still out there standing in someone else's backyard, smiling through someone else's glass. But I do know this. Once you see him, you'll never feel safe looking at a window in the dark again. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear Eli's voice, that small, steady whisper. What if he follows you? It's the question I can't answer, the one that still keeps me awake, because maybe he already has.